Hi, welcome back to You Can Homeschool. I'm Tracey Hagerman, the also known as the Happy Homeschooler, and I'm here once again with the lovely Pat Fenner from Breakthrough Homeschooling. Do we have an episode for you today? We talk about schooling, academics, academics. But what about a gap year? What about taking a year off? Not you as the homeschooler, but your child who's been homeschooled. What about them taking a gap year between high school and furthering their education? What does that look like? Why would one want to do that? What are the benefits, and what are some of the traps you can fall into by doing that? So we're going to discuss those things today, and Pat's going to get us started.
Okay, and welcome back, everybody. Gap years, I guess back when I was coming up, back in the dark ages, there was no such thing as that. That was called, you kind of dropped out and didn't ever go back to school and did nothing with your life. And so there was really a very kind of a bad impression, or, let's see, what's the word I want to use? Because the bad rap. Yeah, gap year's got a bad rap. So, but during that time, between then and now, college, the cost of a college education has just gone unbelievably through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, I think our teenagers now have there's so many options to them in terms of training and in terms of career choice or entrepreneurship. I know we've talked before about how homeschooling is really kind of a good ground, for raising entrepreneurs. And really, if your teen, at this point, we're talking teenagers, if your teen doesn't have a clear vision of how they can use or what they can do with a college degree, it's almost financially irresponsible to just push them through that. Now, of course, I'm saying this coming from the first two, our older kids. We were just dead set on, you got to go to college, you got to go to college, got to go to college. And kind of learned with one of our other kids at college the hard way, both for him and for us, that college might not have been the best choice. And so I've really kind of come full circle in terms of what I think, is the next step for after high school. And really, once again, it just boils down to, as our homeschools all look different and our kids are all different, their futures and their next steps should be, uniquely tailored to that. And we can do that as homeschoolers. So it's really a gift and a privilege that we're able to do that and pass that on to our kids. So I am no longer, so now I do want to share one caveat. I believe our teens should be prepared to go to college should they decide to do that. Because sometimes when you're in high school, you think you don't want to go to college. By the time you're a senior, you've got a vision. And it's really hard to backtrack and add the courses, that they might need and everything. So I still believe in a college-bound high school program without the stress of you have to go to college, because this way it just opens up more options to them. Tracey, you got three all the way through too. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I would say one of our daughters did a gap year, and her gap year is kind of interesting because what she did is she went as a traveling missionary across Canada with a group of, there were 10 of them in total. And what they did is they went from school to school, sharing the word of God, basically. So it was quite a year. It was 10 months long. And boy, did she grow up in that year, because they had like 2 vans that they were traveling in. They had to make their way from place to place. They were probably at 4 to 5 schools a week. So they were constantly on the road. They were being billeted for their accommodations most times. So even though their day would end, they would go to whatever home they were staying at, and they were expected to, help out with dinner if the families had kids, play with the kids, interact with the family. So they were on basically 24/7. But what it did is it taught her flexibility. It taught her about sort of what's important, seeing different family lifestyles. It taught her how to give, even sometimes when you don't feel like giving. And it taught her, I think one of the big things was just getting along as a group, because when you're with these people every day, for 10 months, there's some great times they had and some really difficult times too.
Mhm.
I remember she was talking about one time uh, they had traveled and they'd gotten off track, and they were supposed to be at some place by, I don't know, 8 in the morning, 8 at night. And they ended up getting lost, and they ended up at the Canadian US border,
Oh,
and the GPS had taken them that way. But a couple of her teammates didn't have passports that allowed them to go into the States, because was from New Zealand and another one was from Australia. So they actually couldn't go that route and they had to backtrack. It took them an extra 5 hours. So they were
oh my
getting to the
gosh.
to the people's place at like 1 in the morning. So, and then the next day they had to go and serve early at the school. But that year taught her a lot. I saw her grow up in that year, in so many ways. And I found she became a lot more empathetic towards
Mm.
others, because you see more and you've had to deal with more. So I think it was a wonderful experience for her. And she's still, all of those 9 other people are still good friends, and they live all over the world basically, but they keep in touch and they have seen each other twice as a group since that time. So that was her experience with a gap year.
Oh,
And
that's
after that, yeah, she was ready to go on to school after that. She was
and that's the
ready for the
thing.
change. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes a student will realize during that gap year, wow, I've discovered something I want to do, but I understand that I'm going to need the training for it. So when they do go back to school, they're a much better student for that. I mean, which is another reason why, like, even people our age that go back to school are a lot more intentional about their studies, because if you do go back, you're going back for a reason. It's not just, well, I'm expected to do that. But one thing that you mentioned that was really interesting, I've heard a reason for going to college right away is that not only for the education, but that it's a great time to start networking. And I think what we need to do, and that, I'm not arguing with that. That's sure that you can do that. Of course, you can also choose not to do that. If your teen goes to college and ends up just partying all the time, you don't really want them to be networking with that kind of crowd. But I think it's important to teach our kids even while they're younger. Middle school even isn't too young to start that. Uh, Remembering people, what do they do? That's networking. Networking is really just learning about people, being interested in other people, and then being able to call it to mind what they do and how they might help or how you might help them. Recently, my youngest daughter wants to become an ASL interpreter, and that's where she's heading for and stuff. And recently, my oldest daughter, who is not at all related to that field, she has nothing to do with that. She did an introduction to my daughter and another young lady who is in college preparing to become about to graduate as an ASL interpreter. And I asked her, I said, honey, how did you know somebody you don't do anything with this? This is not in your wheelhouse at all. She said, well, actually, the woman is a daughter of the woman who cuts my hair. And I just remembered that she was telling me about this story, one time when she was doing my hair, and I thought it might help my sister. So I made that introduction. And she wasn't considering it networking, but it absolutely is. And your daughter did that certainly in her mission trip during that year. You mentioned people all over the world now that she's connected with in some form or fashion. And I think that's really a good life skill to start teaching our kids. Is networking, and you can call it whatever you want,
Mhm.
interacting socially or whatever, but it really will come in handy whether or not you go back straight into school, even if you're doing a gap year.
Yeah, Pat, I wanted to add to that. Our youngest daughter, she really had no idea what she wanted to do. And our older two was really apparent from very young where they were headed, which I don't think is the norm. I think the norm is most kids, they're not sure, right? Because they
Mm.
don't know what all the jobs are out there. They don't know what all the things
Right.
are out there. So one of the things we did to help her out is we had her go and we sort of made a list of all the people that we knew through our church, friends, acquaintances, to that. And then we were sort of writing, okay, what do they do for work? And so we were kind of brainstorming, and then we'd ask them like, what do you do, by the way? Or what does your dad do, or whatever. So we had this list. And then what we did, we started saying, okay, what are some of the things on this list that might interest you? So she went, there was a teacher that lived next door to our neighbor, a high school math teacher. So she went and interviewed her. And she did it as part of a project that she was working on, a paper. But I said, okay, why don't you go interview people that are in a job that maybe you might want to do. So she spent an afternoon, it was supposed to be like a half-hour interview, and it was a few hours long because they just got to talking.
Mhm.
And so she kind of considered it and came back. And then another thing, she was really interested in being a paramedic. She thought it was something that she would really like to do. So she ended up meeting with a paramedic, and again spoke to her for about 3 hours, and came home, and she was so excited about it. So I said, okay, let's sit down and see what that would look like in real life as a paramedic. And what she learned is there were a lot of things that the paramedic did that really interests my daughter, like being in the moment, like not sitting at a desk, but being
Mhm.
in the moment, interacting with people, helping people. But as she learned more about the job and their long shifts, and a lot of times, at least in Ottawa, where we live, the paramedics usually work like 7 days in a row, and then they're on a week, off a week, or at least the woman she was talking to. So this lady was saying that, she would not really see her family, because by the time she would get home with her long shifts, she wouldn't see the kids. So it was kind of like it was every other week. And she said, it's really something to think about as a female, what kind of lifestyle you want later on. And so my daughter, she came home, and at first she was excited, but as we, delved in deeper, we kind of determined that there were things about the job she liked, but that wasn't the right avenue for her. And so over time, we found like, oh, she loves public speaking. She's really good, like I said, in the moment. She's really good at like wrangling kids, like being at the front, like at our church. And, she'll walk into to help with the kids or to lead the kids, and they all listen to her. Like she has a knack. So over time, with some of her skills, she decided to go get a business degree. And she's now finishing her very last semester as we speak. And again, she's not sure which avenue, but it was sort of like going to person and talking to them and figuring out what are my skills. And I think with business, there's so many different things you can do.
Mhm.
Um, so again, that helped her out. And I think in a gap year, it has to be intentional. The year has to be intentional. So if one is, maybe once a week or every 2 weeks, they're going to actually speak to someone in a particular field, and asking them, what do you do? What's the lifestyle like? What kind of courses do you need? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? I think that's so helpful. So the gap year can't just be this transient year where you're kind of just hanging out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's the one thing that will make or break a gap year. And I'll put a link in the show notes to a post I'd written about that the one thing you have to do is have some kind of plan. And I love what Tracy did with her daughter. And if you have a senior right now, or even a junior, and that's, who doesn't know kind of what direction they want to go in, that's a great activity to do. And if you're feeling pressure for time, it's something that maybe you can do or they can do during their gap year. Don't feel like you have, it's hard. Our kids sometimes feel like they have to make a decision, and this decision is going to be for the rest of their life, and there's no changing and no going back. And I think that's what gives them all that stress.
Mhm.
Um, but if for them to be able to see that there are options, and I don't know about you, Tracy, but I never even used my college degree. So much for that. Of course, I mean, I don't regret doing it. It was a wonderful program. I had a great time. But in terms of like practical, this is what I became, no, it didn't even. So I would hate to saddle any of my kids with all this increased college debt and then have that same result,
Mhm.
which is very possible. And we know that. Actually, I was listening the other day that parents who are taking out student loans for their teens uh, to go to college. And so, college debt is just growing at an alarming rate. Don't do that, parents. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
not saying that's a good
Mhm.
thing. It's not a good thing. You're on your, downward slide for income earning, and it's going to put you at a pretty bad disadvantage when they're done and when you're done paying for it. But yeah, have a plan and encourage your teen to have a plan and then help them work the plan. Tracy and I were talking about this one time before, and I said, don't use it as a time just to what did I say? Flip burgers. But Tracy, you pointed something out good about that.
Yeah,
What was that?
yeah. I I think flipping burgers is a mighty fine thing to do because it
If
teaches them what they don't want to do for the rest of their life. It really
that's true.
does. And I've had friends and acquaintances, and I've seen this happen too many times to count, where their child finishes high school, they don't know what they want to do. So, and like you said, the cost of education is like unbelievable these days. So the parents say, okay, that's fine. This year you can take a year. But then I see that youth doesn't even have a job that year of any
Mm,
kind. So what do they end up doing? They're sitting playing computer games for the year. The parents come home, the house is a mess. They don't help cook dinner. They won't get off their game. They're depressed because they're not feeling very productive. And it's this downward spiral where the parents are frustrated and the youth just feels useless. And I've seen this happen over and over. So if your youth is going to do a gap year, I highly suggest that they get a job, at least a part-time job. And there's no reason they can't do a full-time job. If they're not studying, there are so many other hours in the day and they're young and energetic. They need to get a job, and it will give them a sense of pride. And I also recommend that your children pay for their education. Now, I live in Canada, so my children have paid all of their education themselves, and have walked out of school debt free. My daughter's just about to finish, my youngest daughter, and she has enough to pay back all her loans by working
mm.
in the summers and that. So I know it's not as expensive in Canada, but it's still expensive, and they have all been able to do that. Um, so and they're proud of the fact that they've paid for their education and they took their courses seriously, even when they didn't want to. They saw the money going out and thought, I don't want to repeat this course. It costs
Mhm.
so much money. So part of the gap year is maybe it's your child working to put some money away for school or for a trade that they want to go into or for an apprenticeship or something. But that flipping hamburgers will go a long way towards your child's sense of self-worth, which is so important in those teen years.
Yeah, well, I think it's the important thing is just that there's a plan, because I don't know about Canada. I know in the States, though, if you're just doing a minimum wage job like that, that won't help you with college. Paying for college, it's just ridiculously expensive. But it will if that's part of the program. Work part time, interview people, explore.
Yeah,
Whatever. It's just you just have to have a plan for it,
yeah,
because otherwise it is easy for the year to go. You and I know that. How easy is it for a year to go by and wait, what happened? you know
yeah, yeah.
and then they're no closer to their goal than they were initially.
Yeah, and I just want to add that uh, the way they were able to pay for their school, it didn't happen in 1 year before they went to college. They'd been saving babysitting money, snow removal, or whatever little jobs they had, and then getting a job at McDonald's at 15 years old or whatever. And so we had a philosophy that they basically saved 80% of what they made, and they tithe 10% and they spent 10%. And because they had everything else they needed, because it was provided for them by us, their
Mhm.
parents, that formula they continued. So it wasn't, I have to say they did work very hard, but that's another thing. It doesn't have to start in that gap year. It can start before. Anyways, that's a whole other subject. But again, like Pat says, the plan for the year, And I also want to add that that's a good time during that year to also have it structured that your youth is helping with household responsibilities, so if mom's still homeschooling other kids and dad's going to work, or maybe both parents are working, that child has a responsibility to maybe prepare the meal once or twice a week, or to go do the groceries once a week. So learning those adult skills that will serve them well later. And again, also feeling that sense of worth in that year that they're off. And I'll tell you, it really motivates them for the next year when they do go off to college or university, that they're like, okay, I've done that. Now I want to move on with my life. I want to do
Right.
something else. So it really helps, but it has to be planned out. Really does.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a great approach too, to have them be part of the family. I mean, if they want to be an adult, I mean, they're exploring their future as an adult. They've graduated from high school, so they are either college, career, whatever bound, uh, and they want to be treated as adult. Well, this is how to do it. If you had anybody else living at your home long term, you'd have them be a part, take the trash, whatever it is. And you're right, Tracy, they'll be all of a sudden find themselves out in college or an apartment or whatever. And, oh, I didn't realize the trash didn't go out on its own. you know? So they're used to doing those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to add was, in the homeschooling, we always had the formula. You've heard me say this over and over, but quarter time academics, a quarter time volunteering, a quarter time exercise and being outside, and a quarter time downtime to do things that they want. Well, in a gap year, I think it's really important to maintain a balance somewhat like that. So let's say they've always wanted to learn how to play guitar. Well, the gap year might be the year to do it, because when you don't have to be studying for exams or papers or that, it does allow you to have a lot more time. So maybe they want to learn a new language. That might be the time to do it as well. Or maybe they want to become, I don't know, a veterinarian, and they can volunteer somehow at the local, dog rescue place or whatever. I think that's the year to do it. So it doesn't always have to be a paid opportunity. I do suggest your youth does get some kind of part-time job, but outside of that, it can be a really rich year if it's balanced, and they can try some of those projects that they may not have had time for. So it's not just all, grunt work, but they are living a balanced life, trying to figure out, and they're out and about meeting people. I think is really important for that age as well. Meeting new people and getting themselves in new situations also will give them confidence later on to try new things.
Hmm. Oh, preach it. You're absolutely right. And I know, Tracy and I know right now that in the environment we're living in, some of this is challenging. But I think what's important is to, rather than take like the victim mentality of, well, we can't do that, because of COVID or whatever, uh, help encourage them to be creative about it. Because we don't know that this won't happen again. I mean, there's no way to predict what's going to happen in the future, and we want to raise resilient young people, right? And people that will be able to be solution finders rather than problem whiners. And this is a perfect opportunity for them to do that and help them along with it. Like, I know sometimes my teens went through a thing where they didn't want to share things with me because they felt like, well, I can do this, I don't need help. And but that's and I understand that it's part of breaking away. But if you think as an adult, that's not a as an adult, that's not necessarily a healthy attitude, right? Because we realize at our age that we need other people, and it's good
Mhm.
to get input from different aspects, and different people that have different thoughts and experiences and stuff. So I forget where I was going with that, but anyway, the point is to just encourage them to talk about it and be a part of it. Not that you are going to give them the solution, but that you might be a sounding board, for them.
Mhm. Absolutely. And you were mentioning, with COVID, and that's a little more difficult. One of the things my youngest daughter is currently involved in, and has been for the last 2 years, is there was a charity that we have been involved with for a long time, and they were looking for board members. And so they had approached myself, and I didn't feel I had the time to get involved. But my daughter was standing with me, and I kind of looked at her, and they said, or are they the other person looked at her and said, would you be interested? We need more youth. And anyway, so she joined a board of directors for a local charity, and she's now vice chair actually of that organization. And it's been challenging because this is a charity that provides a service that they can't provide during COVID. So they're trying to find other ways to reach out. And so there's been a ton of change, and she's been involved in all that. What a wonderful experience. And also something to go on her resume. She has a
Mhm.
business background, and now she's saying she's vice chair on a board of directors, and she's loving it. And they're liking having someone young with new ideas and that to add. So that's another avenue. If your children, there's so many different places that are always looking for
Mhm.
help of some kind to volunteer or that. So and that can all be done over Zoom, we found out, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's
So,
right.
but that's been a really great experience for her. But I won't say it wasn't without challenges when you see real world situations and things that organizations go to, especially charitable organizations trying to get funding. And
Right.
so,
Well,
wonderful experience though.
what a great, not only for her resume, but imagine if she had, that's during her, she's in school right now, right? Doing this.
Yes.
But imagine if your teen took the year off and really got involved in something like that and then goes to apply to school. The thing today is colleges are looking for one or two things that are going to make your teen stand out. They really don't want the it's spoon-fed kind of student. And to be able to show, okay, I didn't go right into college, but I was, you know, very active in this, group, and I did this, and you have an amazing, not only a resume, but an amazing college application that really does make you stand out, and you know, just give you that some kind of extra special something, for a college admissions counselor, should they decide to do that.
Yeah, and it really adds, I think, to an individual's self-worth when they're giving
Yes.
back without receiving anything like tangible in return. I see how much time my daughter puts into it, how much she cares. And even with her course load and that, sometimes she can't do as much. And she's like, okay, this week I'm in midterms, so I'm not as available. But she has a real heart for it. And it builds you up inside. And I think our youth need that. Our youth are so capable nowadays, and each youth has a different talent or skill that God has given them. So to put that into use for the betterment of someone else, I just think is just such a good thing. And what a wonderful opportunity during a gap year to take the time to
Hmm.
do those things.
And that's actually an activity that's been proven uh, to to combat like depression and things like that, to stop looking at yourself and to see what you can do for others. And the reason I mention that is during this COVID year, especially youth and teen rates of suicide and
Mhm.
depression are just going through the roof. And I think it's because we're so self-focused,
Mhm.
and we're not, for different reasons. And I'm not judging here, just the result of the environment we live in right now has caused us to be just focused on ourselves and not focused on how we can help others. What specific skills and abilities and talents do we have that we can use for somebody else, like you point out. And that really is, it's very gratifying, and a concrete way to build your self-esteem. It's not like just saying, "Oh, you're so wonderful," a
Mhm.
kind of shallow
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
It's, no, I've contributed to this organization because I've been able to do this over the past year or whatever. And that is really a wonderful thing because they're helping somebody else and not so focused on
Yeah.
themselves.
But I also think there's situation like my son knew he wanted to be an engineer. He was happy to get going, to the next step to school. There was no reason for him to take a year off. So when we talk about gap year, I think it really depends on the youth,
Oh,
whether it makes
absolutely.
sense or not. And I think it can be really positive, and I think it can be really negative if it's not planned out. It can be a waste of a year.
Yeah, it
So
it definitely depends on your student. Uh, what I, would just hope that we can encourage parents through this particular episode is just not to be afraid of the concept. If
mhm.
you're if it looks like your teen, you're not quite sure, or they're not quite sure, a gap year is nothing to be feared, like I did, initially. And it could be a really good opportunity for them. And that's what we want to do, is provide our teens, our children, our teens, then with opportunities that they can grow into and use their God-given gifts and talents and abilities. Basically, what you're doing by helping your teen work through this is you're being a guidance counselor.
Yeah.
The couple of years that my daughter was in traditional high school, I had always assumed that every high school had a college guidance counselor that will help kids go to college. We had one in our high school. Of course, when I think back on it, I was in a college prep school. I mean, that was the road every graduate was expected to take. But I discovered that her high school didn't have one, and that you know, kind of took me by surprise until I did a little bit more research and realized most schools don't have a college counselor. So I wrote a post, and I just did a lot of research because I felt like, I know as a homeschool parent, I kind of felt like sometimes I was maybe giving my teens the short shrift because they didn't have access to a counselor. But hello, I found out that I could become one. So I don't have a degree in it or anything, but I did write a post with some really good resources that you can, if you're feeling kind of inadequate in walking your teen through this or preparing them for a gap year. I'll put the link to that again too in the show notes. But you can do this, and honestly, your teen best. We'll go back to that again. We know with homeschooling, your teen best, their gifts and talents and abilities. You can have conversations with them whenever on the fly. They don't have to make an appointment to go see you in their office. And you are best suited to be their best homeschool guidance counselor and help them work through this gap year.
Yeah. So I think that's all I wanted to say, and
Mhm.
maybe just end off with um, a gap year, like you said, not to be afraid of it, but to embrace it. And I think it could be really exciting as your youth sits down to plan out their gap year. What are the fun things they're going to do? What are their goals? And then maybe have that, like you said, that guidance counselor or mentorship role where, once a month you check in and you look at the goals, where are they at, what's working, what's not working, where do we want to tweak it. I think that will be maybe a year that they'd really look back on with a lot of affection. I know my daughter, who had the very interesting gap year, I know she looks very fondly on that year and the
Mhm.
privilege that she had to be able to do that. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a great point. Great spot to end this. Very encouraging for parents. Well, folks, I'm glad. Thank you again for joining us this week at You Can Homeschool. Stay tuned next week. We have definitely tune in next week. We're going to have an interview with Jed and Jenny Cherchenko, which will they're a great couple. You will love them, and they give us some tips and techniques and some practical help for encouraging our marriage while we are homeschooling as well. And so that'll be really fun. And of course, just to remind you that if you haven't rated or reviewed our podcast in a while, we would so appreciate if you felt any encouragement from this episode to uh, go ahead and do that. Give us a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify, and we'll have the links again back there wherever you're getting your podcast from. We'd appreciate that. All right, folks. Well, thank you. We will see you again next week. And Tracey, you have a good week as well. And remember, guys, you can
You can homeschool
homeschool.
and it can be great.
That's right. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.